Hello, Shoyan here. The wall insulation is all done, so as usual, I'll start on the floor. This house doesn't use much solid wood. I'm using just one type of synthetic material. Now, I'm finally moving on to the interior work. Depending on the builder's preferences or construction method, we start with either the ceiling or the floor. For me, starting from the floor just feels easier. Some people say you don't need to protect the floor if you start with the ceiling, but I still prefer to begin from below. Since this house uses a subfloor method without joists, once I fit the kamachi at the entryway, I can go ahead and lay the floorboards. First up is the tricky part, the entryway kamachi. It's not straight and not square either. There's a bathroom in front, which creates a diagonal wall, so I'm running a narrow strip of flooring across it. It's a uniquely shaped entryway. The kamachi opens out at obtuse angles instead of right angles. Matching pieces at angles greater than 90 degrees is pretty challenging. I draw out the shape and size directly on the subfloor plywood and decide on the final shape from there. Before that, I'm removing the column I had already set. At first, the designer asked, should we leave it out or just use a stud? I thought it'd be easier to work with a solid column that doesn't move at all, so I left it in. But with the wall running diagonally, it didn't help much. It actually made things harder. So I'm going to bevel the column by cutting off the front face. I start beveling one side of the removed column. It's only a slight angle, but a circular saw can't get through in one pass. If I use the electric planer from the start, it'll just make a pile of chips. So I'm using the biggest circular saw I have on site, one that can cut about 75 millimeters deep, and finishing the rest with the electric planer.
What?同じになってるでしょ。1枚はクリーンって巻いたんやね。
だから木目おかしくね。
じゃあだからこういうものこの辺のマサのこの辺でマサってのはないんや。
あえてこれは継ぎはぎにしてるの？
継ぎはぎにしてあるやろ。
これは継ぎはぎのシートではなく継ぎはぎの柄ってこと？
メーカーに聞いてくれ。
Next, I work on the entryway kamachi. It's made from the same synthetic material, but with a wood grain pattern laminate sheet. It's a trendy color and the wood grain matches the flooring. So when the flooring is installed and everything's done, I'm sure it'll look seamless. With the subfloor method, unlike using joists, the kamachi sits deeper. So I need to cut a large rabbet to fit it. That's the tricky part with the kamachi. I can't use a groove cutter or circular saw for cuts this big. It takes some effort. Next, I cut the entryway kamachi. I simply cut the end through with the miter saw and join it. If the joint were at a right angle, I could cut a mortise and tenon and join them firmly. But with a miter joint and such large obtuse angles, it's hard to get a tight fit. Also, this is a laminated synthetic material. If I join a tenon into the mortise at an angle, it puts stress on it. If sunlight hits that part, the sheet can stretch or shrink. That's asking for trouble. This time, I've got two joints. Both ends are simply cut and joined with no tenons or traditional joinery involved. Even then, cutting the right angle isn't easy. I use an adjustable square to measure the exact angle and cut it. I can cut along the line I drew, but starting by hand is tough. I used the biggest miter saw I have, which I normally use for interior joinery, but it still couldn't cut all the way through. I made a curved cut to the depth I thought I could cut by hand. I kind of coaxed it along, but it gave me a hard time. It looked like it fit, but not quite. The place where the kamachi sits is already made into an L shape, so I just need to glue it and set it in place. But screwing two plain cut pieces without any proper joinery can be tricky. Driving in a screw pulls the joint, so if the ends aren't shaped with any joinery, the joint can shift. You have to account for that movement when fastening. It may sound simple, but getting a perfect fit is really tough. The tricky part with this synthetic material is that even being 1/10 of a millimeter off causes a visible step and you can't fix it later. If it were solid wood like usual, I could adjust it by planing. But with this laminated material, the base layer shows through when you plane it. Since I can't plane it, I have to line up the top and face perfectly before screwing it in. Honestly, synthetic materials are harder to work with than solid wood.
Oh.
Now, the entryway kamachi is done. Next, I start laying the floorboards. These are standard 300mm by 1820mm boards, common 12mm thick laminated flooring. Each pack has 6 boards, 2 of each grain pattern, so 3 designs in total. It's up to the installer how to lay them. There are no rules. This time, I laid one pattern in a single row lengthwise. Even if you line up the floorboards with the same pattern, the grain never actually matches. That's just how they're made. They're not designed to look too uniform. And I think the idea is to make it look a bit more like natural wood. Still, I wish they'd tweak the design so that the sapwood lines matched up a little better, even if the grain is different. As always, the first board is critical when installing the floor. In this case, there's a wall right in the middle. I could just cut the board the midpoint with the wall, but instead, I notch around the diagonal bracing and studs and run a full board through under the wall. I've already marked the line, but instead of relying on the mark by eye, I join the actual boards together to make sure there's no misalignment. That's the golden rule for the first board. It may look fine now, but once I get to the third board in the hallway, it'll definitely interfere with the structure. If I'm even 1mm off here, it'll keep throwing things off the whole way down. So I butt the boards together carefully and check for misalignment as I go. Unlike solid wood, no finish gets applied, so I'm using urethane glue. Then I fasten the boards with the usual 38mm staples. Next, I move on to the curved section of the floor near the entryway kamachi. Whenever that kamachi is tricky to fit, you can bet the flooring will be a pain too. But in this case, I only need to fit the floorboard to the kamachi. The back is just a wall. That makes it easier. If I had to match both the front and back sides of the kamachi, I'd never get a clean fit. When the section you're joining sticks out, it's much easier to fit the board. It's easy to plane or shave the board to adjust it. But when it curves inward into a sort of V shape like this, there's no room to use normal carpentry tools. For spots like this, nothing beats sandpaper. I wrap it around a straight piece of wood and use that to work the inner reference corner. No matter how good your hand tools are, they can't beat sandpaper here. Next, I precisely determine the access panel location and lay the floorboards based on the outer frame location. I keep the offcuts from that section, as I'll use those to make the access panel hatch later. Once the floorboards are down, I install the access panel. This house has two of them, one for the floor insulation area and one for the foundation insulation area. So I'm putting in two different types of panels, one with insulation in the hatch and one standard panel. They look and install completely differently, but each is suited to its purpose. There's a surprising variety when it comes to access panels. I start with the standard panel. I kept the offcut from that spot when I laid the flooring, so I can reuse it to make the hatch with the same pattern. But you can never make the hatch from a single board. Sometimes you can use two boards cleanly divided in the middle of the hatch, but not always. When you've got a subfloor underneath like this, the beam positions are fixed. You also need to think about things like the vanity placement, so you can't always divide it evenly. Anyway, I make sure the grain lines up as best I can. The other access panel is built for both insulation and air tightness. You can see it has a styrofoam layer on the bottom. Even the screws are hidden in the design. And of course, the hatch itself is insulated too. This type of panel is worth the price, sturdy and well made, though it costs several times more. Since it's a higher-end panel, it also comes with a template for the hatch. That makes it way easier to get the handle placement and hatch fit just right. I've now finished installing the entryway kamachi and the first floor flooring. This grain pattern works great for both Japanese and Western styles. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.